He is risen.
He is risen indeed. It's Easter, everybody. Happy Easter Sunday on this holiday edition of Serious Danger, a podcast about green politics in Australia. I'm Tom Ballard. That's Emerald Moon. Happy
Amen.
Easter, Emerald.
Happy Easter. He is risen indeed.
Hallelujah.
And to celebrate, hey, did we say we're not an official Greens Party podcast and
Yeah, sure.
Mike the Griffin produces it and all that? Just making sure that we have said that. I understand that you, lazy, I have a break every week, but you're taking a break this week, which is why we are recording this special introduction. Is that right, Tom?
Yeah, well, I'm very dedicated to Jesus, so I'll be taking some time off. I will be performing my show, Be Funny Challenge Impossible, at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival, and my play Jokes Are Comedy, which I assume by the time this comes out, all will be entirely sold out. But if they're not Danger Dogs, do come along if you're in Melbourne. We'd love
if you
to see
should be
there.
so lucky.
Yeah. We've been doing heaps of episodes, and we thought we'd just take a week off and unlock a little episode, bring you something from out behind the paywall, if you're not a Danger Dog, for you to enjoy.
Indeed. We are unlocking a special episode for anyone, especially anyone who's not currently on the Patreon, which, by the way, you should consider subscribing to. It is only $3 a month. It is how the show runs. It's how we pay Mike, and it gives you access to an extra bonus episode every couple of weeks, and that's where I, Emerald, am.
Yes, indeed.
Now that I'm not on the main feed. However, if you're not on there already, patreon.com/seriousdangerau, then you wouldn't maybe be aware that we've been reading Paddy Manning's Inside the Greens, a lovely, detailed, incredibly well-researched book about the Greens political party by journalist Paddy Manning. Published when?
2019.
Yeah, okay, so it goes all the way from like the start of the Greens up to 2019, and I don't know, like we read it. What is there to say? The fact we read all these chapters, we discussed them, and then we thought, you know who we forgot to ask about this? The guy that wrote it. So we got him on and we talked to him about it, and he was like, thank you for finally bringing me into the room, guys. We had a lovely old chat about kind of, yes, what it was like writing the book, the response from Greens members and Greens adjacent people as he was writing it, and now how he feels about it, perhaps in retrospect, looking back, some moments that maybe seemed bigger at the time when he was writing it than they are now, and of course the things that he couldn't possibly have foreseen happening after he'd already published the book for the Greens.
I think you'll enjoy this chat even if you haven't read Inside the Greens, or even if you haven't listened to our series. I think you'll get a lot out of it, and we get insights about, you know, the bigger picture from Paddy, this massive history. I mean, when we say at the start of the Greens, we're talking about the mid-60s, like he really charting the history of the various movements that ended up becoming the federal Greens. So there's a lot there. His reflections on that, the good and bad of the moments that he researched over that time about where the party was at. And then, reflections on where the party's gone since 2019, when, of course, lots of things have changed. There have been some really cool moments, and there have been some other ones.
I like to think of it, it's Inside the Greens, and then it's Serious Danger continued after that. And so you can get a little bit of a reflection of, you know, a pre-Serious Danger world from
the party
from
was lost.
Before us, there was Paddy, yeah.
Enjoy this. Hope you're having a great long weekend. See you at the Comedy Festival. And thank you for being here, Emerald Moon. Let's talk to Paddy Manning.
Happy Easter. This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
Danger Dogs.
Inside the Greens with Paddy Manning, author of Inside the Greens.
We're so far up inside the Greens right now. We're deep. We're deep.
We're in the esophagus, the stomach.
It's finally over, everyone. A big series reading Paddy Manning's Inside the Greens, the origin and future of the party, the people and the politics, is wrapping up with his final episode as we talk to the man himself, Paddy Manning. He wrote this thing. He wrote the whole thing, you know.
If you can't see, Tom's holding up a big, thick book. Perhaps more important than ever on this episode, even though you are a Dear Danger Dog and you make the show happen, so you already know all this stuff. But just to reiterate, this is not an official Greens Party podcast.
It is an official ABC podcast. But,
But
That's
the
a joke.
sanctity of Paddy Manning's future income and his employability, we must make clear that these are his opinions and some of them are our opinions and not his opinions. When we're talking, our opinions, not his opinions. All of us talking, never the opinions of the ABC. Clear?
No. I think he would say it's not even his opinion, it's his political analysis based on the history of his political party that
he
he's
doesn't
been
have
writing.
opinions.
He has no opinion. No one at the ABC has any opinions, as we all know.
It's actually incredible. They undergo a new form of lobotomy when they commence employment at the ABC, where they just remove the opinion part. It's quite amazing.
If you are a long-time Danger Dog, you know we've been reading this book for a very long time. We started reading Inside the Greens with Paddy Manning in July of 2023 in Patreon episode 30, Emerald. So it's only taken us, what's that, 3 years almost
3 years.
to read this book, finishing chapter 11 in January of this year in Patreon episode 90. We never really got your review of it. Like, how many stars do you give it? Did you have a fun time?
That's crazy.
Reading it?
How many stars do I give it? I would give it 5 stars for effort. And that sounds derogatory. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean genuinely, like, the amount of research and detail that has gone into the book is incredibly impressive. And as a historical report, I learned so much. I also feel like I've grown up with this book because it has been 3 years. I'm a different person to when we started. Who knows how much of that is a credit to the book. But I do find it interesting how, like, I have such a different perspective on the Greens and the book and the history of the party and everything from when we started. And I feel like reading this book has helped me to it's been one of the things that helps me process the losses from the elections over 2024 and 2025, because it's like, it really is a zoom out and you can go, oh, we've lost before and then we've won again. And that's made me feel a little bit better.
And yes, the inspirational examples of people who, of course, not all they don't always make amazing choices. Some of their politics aren't our politics, blah, 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 blah. These are people who have dedicated huge amounts of time and energy. They've got arrested. They've put themselves on the line. They've been through shit and demonized in the press, all because of something bigger than themselves. And it's exactly the same cause and mission that inspires us to keep doing what we're doing, either within the party or outside of it. And so, if nothing else, it's definitely worth that. If you haven't listened to the whole series of us reading the book, if you haven't read the book, that's totally fine. I think you'll still really get a lot out of this conversation with Paddy Manning. He talks to us about the process of actually writing it. Tells us the amazing story of how the book came about, which is very inspiring. And sort of talks through this big history, which stretches from the mid-1960s all the way up to the 2019 election. It involved him interviewing 110 current or former Greens, including 47 past or present Greens MPs. And as I say to Paddy in this chat, whatever you think of the book itself or the events that it covers, the idea that there is a book that takes this party and this movement seriously is valuable in and of itself. And I think we've laughed and learnt so much about the Greens while reading Inside the Greens. It was great to sort of culminate that in this conversation with Paddy, I think.
Producer Mike the Greek Griffin, take it away. Takes to the interview.
All right, Paddy Manning is a veteran journalist and writer who's worked for Crikey, Fairfax, and News Corp, and many other outlets. He's the author of 6 books, including Body Count, Boganer, The Rise and Fall of Nathan Tinkler, What the Frack, Born to Rule, the unauthorized biography of Malcolm Turnbull, and The Successor, The High-Stakes Life of Lachlan Murdoch. He's currently undertaking a PhD on the history of News Corp in Australia, which sounds like a punishment, but it's something he's chosen to do with his life. And he is also working as an investigative reporter for the ABC in Tasmania. Most importantly, for our purposes, he spent 3 years of his goddamn life researching and writing all 480 pages of Inside the Greens, of which we've read most of them. Paddy Manning, welcome to Serious Danger. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I have absolutely... Sorry, go.
Oh, it just feels odd because it feels like we've been talking about you for like 3 years and now we've finally invited you on for Right of Reply.
I know, because I've been putting my hand up on Twitter and stuff and kind of going, I've got something to contribute to this discussion, but only now get the invite. when it's all over. But look, I have honestly been absolutely thrilled and sometimes cringing at my own writing. Like I think I burst a rainbow or some horrible mixed metaphor the other day.
Burst forth like a rainbow. Applause. It does that.
Whatever. And so anyway, but yes, I think that it's I'm still incredibly proud of the book. I think that the history is important, and it's great Australian history apart from anything else. And I have loved you giving it a new lease of life.
Well,
So
it's been
I'm
a pleasure
grateful.
to do. It was great. It's been as we've mentioned previously in this episode, it's been a very long ongoing series. It's taken us a couple of years, but we know there's been lots of listeners who've been with us on that journey. I'm sure lots of people have sought out the book themselves to find out about it. And
I'm
the
not so
level of
sure about
research. Well, I guess you see the sales figures, but
Yeah, we
so
don't know.
sorry
We're just guessing.
anymore.
I'm sorry if we've cost you money by giving
I
this
think
away
it's
for
well
free.
and truly remained.
Well, I'm a big fan. Look at this thing, guys. Come on. It's a big old history. Everyone could enjoy it. Why don't we just start with the start? Tell us about the initial idea for the book, how you came to be writing Inside the Screens, this massive tome and this massive history, and how'd you go about putting it together?
Geez, you know what? I can't remember where the idea came from or why I embarked on it. I honestly can't. I can remember the contract negotiations, and I remember the thumping, overwhelming disinterest
Right.
from most publishers. And I remember the size of the advance, which was not huge. So we're talking low 5 figures. But basically,
This is such a beautiful story. This is a really inspiring history that I'm glad we're getting on the record.
I did feel something like this, which might get me in trouble, but I did feel that I had written books about psychopaths, but I needed to write something about people that I had a admiration for in some way, like so. Yes, I felt that. The way what the frac came together was kind of accidental. It was originally going to be a chapter of a big book on coal. I was sitting on the energy desk at the Sydney Morning Herald, writing business about the coal industry, and writing a column called G Business, or GBiz it was, GBiz, about green business, and. Yeah, my head was full of that, and I wrote the book about Nathan Tinkler after I got a good scoop on him, and how he was going broke. And then I pitched this book on Malcolm Turnbull, thinking, oh, no one's going to be interested in. But I thought it was absolutely crystal clear at the beginning of 2015 that he was going to challenge. Then we had the empty chair challenge, and lo and behold, there was an absolute bidding war for my Turnbull book, and I wasn't in the press gallery, so that was surprising to me. But I got a 6-figure advance from 3 different publishers, and then I rolled off that and thought I'd like to write a book about the Greens,
About good people, about the good politicians,
something like that. That was the start anyway.
Do they pay 6 figures for books about the Greens?
Yeah.
No, they don't. No, that's where your low 5s come in. And
Believe it.
Yeah. And of course, it was wildly uneconomic because it was supposed to be done in a year. I wrote the Turnbull book in 7 months. And instead, I ended up spending 3 years on it. I did 2. Happily, it was published by Black, and there were 2 monthly essays written along the way. Rolling off the 2016 election, there was a lot, and Richard Di Natale's leadership, taking over from Christine Milne. There were a lot of kind of big crossroads questions about where the Greens were going, and then I. Because it was called Inside the Greens, someone said to me, "Are you inside the Greens?" And I took that as a personal challenge to really kind of get literally inside the conferences. One of the standing criticisms of the Greens is that their conferences are closed, and unlike the Labor Party, for example, and so I was really diligent about it, and spent 3 years on something that just there was no way it was ever going to pay me back. And yet, like I was saying to Tom before we started this conversation, I felt like there was a kind of doctorate in it. I did a lot of fundamental research in the State Library near the National Library, down reading Bob Brown's personal archives down in the Tasmanian State Library, the National Archives. Like I did a hell of a lot of work because I got captivated by the roots of the party. I mean, before the Australian, there's 30 years of history almost before the Australian Greens are even formed in 92. And I actually loved that bit almost more than the Australian Greens bit, which was kind of better known and more in the public consciousness. So, I loved.
It's the history of like a party, yes, but a movement too, right? You really are trying to tell the story of the movement that the party grew out of, or the multiple movements that the party grew out of. Both obviously the environmental movement, yes, but also disaffected socialists and unionists, particularly in the New South Wales context, the anti-nuclear movement as well. Like the Federal Party in the 90s really is the culmination of those three major, or maybe even more, major social movements sort of coming together to become a parliamentary party, right?
Yes, that's exactly how I think of it. And, at the same time, I think, I found it really interesting, for example, reading about the primary votes. I mean, sorry, this is a detour, but one of the many criticisms of this book is there's a lot of small swings in there, like from 2% to 4% in, one freaking by-election to another. And it's not, it's not a great read, but I found it interesting to look at the primary votes for the Communist Party in Newtown, for example, and look at the history of how, it's like when the Communist Party collapses, even if that vote was never huge, it was nonetheless there. And when the Communist Party vote collapses and that party implodes, the Greens kind of, something arises in its place. And similarly, when the Democrats collapse, the Greens are unquestionably inheritors of some of that primary vote. And I found it really fascinating to look at the roots of, the Australia Party, the roots of the Democrats back in the 60s, and the Nuclear Disarmament Party and the Communist Party, and as well the morphing of this kind of brand new thing, the environment movement, into a political movement.
What would you say were the big surprises for you in researching and putting the book together? What really sort of smacked you between the eyes, or when you came across something you thought, "Fuck me, I didn't know that," or "I can't believe that that's true"?
Well, I did think that the Australia Party was a story that was not well understood. And what's it, Gordon Barton, the founder, a crazy story, of this businessman publisher who also founds a party that becomes the Democrats, who takes out an ad, at the time that LBJ visits in 66, and, so it's born of this anger over Vietnam. But it's a kind of strategy that Bob Brown picks up, when he takes up the Pedicores in, I can't remember, 72, I think he takes out an ad. I thought that Australia Party story was fascinating. I think I wrote that book between 16 and 19 at a time, and I was based in Sydney, where the party was certainly in New South Wales, really, really divided. And I think, that division has echoed in other states subsequently, and I think that division was probably turbocharged by Facebook, because there was certainly, I spent a hell of a lot of time wading through Facebook pages that were, oh my God. I mean,
well, this is it. We laughed. When we talk about the left renewal saga, we just laughed at the idea of you having to sit down and seriously talk to people about Facebook groups and how much of a role they played in the competing Facebook groups, like the Left Renewal one, and then the ones to sort of, I guess, save the Greens in response, and the no nastiness page or whatever the fuck they were making in the New South Wales.
And your tree Tories and your watermelons and all the emojis, and it's like, oh my God. And then your sexual harassment allegations and the handling of that. It was turgid.
Less funny.
And not funny at all. And that I didn't expect, and I ended up wanting a shower after I wrote the book, honestly. And I will have people come up to me in, Marrickville or whatever and say, that was the bottom. That was the rock bottom when you were writing that book. The meetings that were happening were personal animosity. People literally between the David Shoebridge camp, the Jeremy Buckingham camp, literally at war, both online but also at these meetings. And so I think, with a bit of distance, I look back at it and think, well, it's one of those situations where you wonder as a journalist sometimes if your scrutiny is part of the problem, if you are fueling the problem by reporting on the problem, or whether to an extent some of the parties are performing, or behaving differently because someone's watching, And I just thought, was there anything really significant of public interest that needed to be reported out of that turgid factional war? I don't know.
It is so interesting. Like, I think it's really hard in the moment to know what is significant. Like, we always feel as though we're living through history right now. This is the most important time to ever have lived. That's kind of human nature to feel that way. And I think it is funny how even a few years difference, you can go, oh, that really was just a blip. But I mean, at the same time, I feel that my perspective on the book has changed even from when we started reading it, and certainly from when I first heard about it, where as a Greens member, I heard that there's this book called Inside the Greens by an outsider, effectively. And my immediate response was suspicion and a little bit of hostility and, well, what the fuck do you know? And don't, be trying to drag a party down that is really just trying to do the right thing. And I do think that my perspective on that has changed, and I believe that the ability of the party to properly look at criticisms of itself and to deal with its shortcomings is what makes it a sustainable project in the long term, and being just too afraid to deal with any kind of criticism or seeing it as counteractive to positive change is not necessarily the right way to go. But I'm curious whether you encountered a similar response from people when you were trying to write this book, that kind of suspicion, hostility, stay away, this is not your business, why are you just trying to drag the Greens down? Yes.
I think I had nailed my colours to the mast on climate change so strongly in my reporting and analysis, that I don't think I was perceived as an enemy of the party per se. Yeah. But I do think that your initial reaction, Emerald, was the standard reaction. And when I was, as in, it's not tribal, but it is like a little bit defensive and wary and of the media, because let's face it, the party has not had a great run in the media for 50 years. So, why would they suddenly...
What's that? Sorry, I haven't noticed that. I didn't... the Greens. The Greens haven't done well in the Australian media?
I thought the Greens got way too good a run in the media.
Well,
yes, that's what I hear on Sky News.
It's funny because... I think a lot of journalists are actually closet Greens, and I've said this when I launched the book, in the sense that it's quite convenient to kind of do a pox on both your houses as a journalist. Like, I don't vote for either of you, Liberal or Labor, and therefore I can be quite objective in the reporting of Liberal and Labor. And often I think, or sometimes I think at least, I wouldn't know, but, I think that what that masks is that privately the journalist is probably voting Green. But on the other hand, then they self-censor because they don't want to be advocating for the Greens. And the net result is the Greens get very little scrutiny or reportage, except when they do the policy hard yards, which is where I landed at the end of the day on on the party is that you can get caught up in the personalities and the factions, but what this party has built over its 50-year plus history now, well, I suppose it's approaching 60, depending on if you go back to 66, that's where we are. But over its history, it has built a formidable policy platform, which to this day distinguishes it from the Teals, the Democrats. Increasingly, even Labor feels that it's policy light, and I think that is the achievement of the party, because it's certainly not doing what they originally intended, which is storming the lower house, or what Labor managed to achieve 100 years earlier, storming the lower house and taking government. That is not what they've done, but they have built a formidable policy agenda, I think.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was that said this or where I got this from, but I always come back to the observation that, a bit tongue-in-cheek, that the Greens are the country's most successful policy think tank.
Right. Yeah, which is a sledge. But because, meanwhile, the Nationals, for example, have, I think, objectively, much more influence, much more power than the Greens, with a much smaller vote, concentrated in just enough seats to give them the ability to make or break a Liberal Party government, and that's all you need. In a handful of seats in Queensland, New South Wales, a bit of Victoria, that's enough. And I remember interviewing Barnaby Joyce for The Monthly, and he just thought it was ridiculous that the Greens crow about a primary vote on a national basis of 12%, which is, I think, roughly ballpark twice what the Nats get. And his view was, so what? It gets you nothing. Your primary vote gets you nothing. What you'll need is seats in, you need to be in cabinet. You need, if you really want to make a difference, you need to be in cabinet. And the Nats are in cabinet with half the primary vote of the Greens. And on an issue like climate change, have for 25 years been an absolute handbrake.
Yes. I mean, not expecting you to defend Barnaby Joyce's position or whatever, but it's like, well, it does say something about, yes.
Someone's got to do it.
Yes, indeed. Surely it says something about, what your politics and the policy agenda you're putting out there might speak to all Australians. If you do actually say, like, how much of the country is subscribing or persuaded to support you politically, yes, obviously that vote needs to be concentrated in certain places in order for that to turn into seats under our system. But, when you're talking about more than 1 million Australians, or, at a peak, 1.5 million Australians or something voting number one Green, it certainly does something to rebuke the notion that the Greens are extreme loonies, completely out of touch with ordinary people, when they're getting twice the vote, the first preference vote of, this party that, as you say, wields an outsized level of power and influence,
Yes. Well, yes, it's a moral tick. Yeah.
That's all we care about here at the Greens.
Well, yes, it depends whether your objective is simply to is to exploit the system, the electoral system that we have in order to wield power, or whether it is to broadly democratically represent as many people as possible, in which case we would need to change to our voting system to incorporate proportional representation in both houses, rather than a single member electorate system, which we've spoken about before.
Yes. Yeah. And good luck with that, because it's like abolishing the states. It's hard enough to get fossil fuel subsidies removed, let alone upend the electoral system, or abolish the states, or have a republic, or, I don't know.
We should probably all just kill ourselves. You're right.
Yes, I don't mean to sound jaded or whatever, but I just I think the proportional representation, I mean, we're constantly pointing towards, well, we've got it in the ACT and in Tassie in a form, there's New Zealand, and constantly pointing towards that. You know, I just don't have, it just feels too, the left just feels too much on the back foot at the moment to worry about any of those constitutional kind of priorities. Like,
yeah, no, you're quite right. You're quite right. But it's a running theme of being in the Greens and doing this podcast is like, here's the correct response. Here's the thing that makes absolute sense. This would be more just and more fair and democratic. Oh, man, it's not going to happen, is it? But we cannot give up. I thought maybe, you know, it was worth just sort of briefly moving through some of the bigger takeaways, the running themes, the things that seem to come up a lot again and again as we read these chapters and sort of charted this history throughout these kind of recurring themes when we talk about the story of the Australian Greens in this country that came through in the book. Maybe starting with, and we've sort of touched on it already, but yes, it seems that the Greens not great at internal disagreement and self-criticism. And we had scandals and these kind of personality clashes, but also pretty serious ideological clashes within the party, and perhaps not always great responding to them, and certainly dealing with those, you know, the raft of sexual assault allegations that we saw in 2017, 2018. Perhaps, yeah, I'd be interested from both of you. Like, why do we think that's the case? Do we think we're getting better at that? Is this just the inevitable consequence of a party? Like, do you have to have the horrible scandal in order to come up with a good policy to address it after the fact? What would you say, looking at this long history, Paddy, about the Greens' ability to deal with internal disagreement and self-criticism?
I suppose I've got a kind of boring vanilla answer, which is that, you know, the Greens were suffered from a structural, you know, requirement to achieve consensus at meetings that were increasingly, as the Greens, you know, primary vote and political influence increased, did become increasingly factionalized, and as the meetings, you know, and then that builds up a kind of tension. And yeah, I think perhaps the fact that the meetings were closed only to members contributes to that. I mean, perhaps a lack of scrutiny contributes to a kind of festering of, you know, internal division. I think I am a little bit out of touch, and everything I say today is kind of like I did put down the Greens history pretty much in 2019 and have not been keeping up with whether, you know, there have been reforms to the party's, you know, branches, whether they've become more democratic, more transparent, whether the culture has changed. I mean, the sexual harassment kind of, you know, allegations, lawsuits, whatever that happened as a result of the Me Too movement did not just affect the Greens. I mean, they affected, you know, the media. They affected, I mean, and it had a particular history in Australia where, you know, we have these very restrictive defamation laws. I think we're the defamation capital of the world. I mean, so, you know, in some ways, the way the Me Too movement kind of broke here was particularly, I suppose, not conducive, but it created a lot of unresolved allegations. I mean, I think, you know, Australia didn't handle Me Too very well as a society, not just the Greens. You know, we didn't have the I mean, we did have a few cases. We had Don Burke. We had a few, but yeah, I felt like there maybe wasn't the reckoning that America had, and maybe the Greens are just part of that. Maybe it's not a criticism of the Greens or at all. But anyway, I was in the middle of that. And I felt that they, you know, it was a criticism that Tanya Plibersek makes of the Greens. They don't handle internal disputes well. I think it's a criticism of the left. You know, the left, you know, there is a tendency towards factionalism on the left. There is a tendency towards ideological kind of, I don't know, splitting. And yeah, I think that maybe the rise of Adam Band that whole leadership, which I didn't get to cover, that whole period where the party did veer left, that might have been an outletting of some of the build-up of factional tension that that I was reporting on when I was writing the history. So I think maybe the culture has changed. Maybe when the left is really in ascendancy inside the Greens, as it was under Band, maybe the culture was better. I'd like to hear. I mean, you guys would know better than I.
Well, I also think maybe the ascendancy of the left, that's an interesting take. I'd have to think more about it. But also just the ascendancy of the party. I think that when the party is doing well and when the Greens are winning, that's something that brings everyone in the party together, because they can go, great, we're fucking winning. Let's do more of that. That's what we're focused on. When there's less winning to focus on, there is a vacuum and shit will fill it necessarily. I think my other obviously biased response to the observation that the left has a problem with factionalism and infighting, I agree. I do think, I would argue, it's because we care. Unfortunately, I think that the way that it manifests, is often people care so much that then they feel it so deeply and they need to get it absolutely right, and sometimes lose track of perhaps the bigger and the more unifying issues. And the other thing that I think about how the Greens respond to criticism is that they are, the Greens are a minor party, they're an insurgent party. They have been a party that's on the outer and kind of the underdog in many ways, and are used to having the full force of institutional power, whether it's political, both major parties, or corporate powers, or lobby groups, the media, all kind of stacked against the Greens as often because they pose a threat to their structural power. And so when something's happening internally, my experience as a Greens member anyway, is often we might be dealing with something internally, and then when someone else jumps in from the outside and has a go at the Greens, it's can you just fucking back off? It feels like a pile-on, It's we're dealing with this. Can you guys just fucking leave us alone for a second? And so I think there's also that defensiveness that comes from necessarily often having to defend yourself and always being up against it and being up against so many forces.
Yes.
And especially when there's not a winning project to focus on, that can really drag the party down.
And because we often get so much criticism and free advice and feedback from people who have no interest in the Greens being successful, right? So it's yes, you need to go through the process of is this a legitimate critique that is worth listening to and thinking through? Is this coming from a place of good faith that people want to see the Greens do well? Or is this our political enemies, of which we have many, as Emil just outlined, doing their best to, stir some more shit?
I mean, I should say, I've never been a member of the Green. The only party I've ever been a member of was the Labor Party very briefly before I became a journalist. And when I did become a journalist, yes. So, in the eastern suburbs, which was pretty left, those branches of Sydney back in the mid-90s, when at that point John Howard got elected and I joined the party, and then, it didn't last very long, but I did a bunch of letterboxing and all the kind of things that you do. But I never joined the Greens. And, everyone assumes because I wrote a book about the Greens, I'm a Green. And, I'm not going to comment on how I vote, but I was not interested in the success of the Greens. I became increasingly interested, and it certainly wasn't my role to kind of boost the Greens. I didn't think. I thought my role was to chronicle what was important Australian history. This is a party that, has a claim to being the first Greens political party in the world, and it is part of a history of Australian political innovation that goes back to enfranchising women or the birth of the Labor movement, and we have a proud history in Australia, I think. Especially, if you look at Brexit or you look at Trump and you kind of go, wow, we dodged both, we dodged all that crazy. And we have a proud, it's a bit reflected in Annabelle Crabb's, civics thing that she did at the end of last year. You know, we have a proud history, political history, and I felt that the Greens were a neglected, understudied part of it. And
yes, you took the party seriously, which again is a big part of our project, I think, of this show, Serious Danger. And the thing that I really appreciated, again, there's a whole bunch of stuff in Inside the Greens that make me go, oh boy, and that don't make me feel amazing as someone who does support the Greens. But I think, yes, what is so admirable, and I think what we really appreciated about going through your book, Paddy, is that yes, you are taking us seriously. While our political enemies and the Labor Party particularly would love to dismiss us and say they're not serious, they have no role to play, they don't have any wins, and you shouldn't pay attention to them or take their project seriously. I think you, by detailing this history, as messy and complicated as it is a real history. It does represent something real in Australian politics, and that project to me of taking it seriously was pretty crucial. Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, and that was, I mean, I did get reaction from, you know, I think I got kind of like soft voice reaction from Greens, you know, even if they weren't kindly portrayed, or even if they didn't get much of a run in the book, kind of going, well done, you know, and in the press gallery, like people kind of whispering to me, like it was a furtive thing to say, like, you know, good on you for doing that. And I
could never publicly admit to reading your book, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah. And look, I think a lot of Greens hated the book. But anyway, whatever. I couldn't have done a better job if I tried. And and I'm busting one day to write an update, because I think that I could probably cut out a hell of a lot. Or if I could make you guys editors of the next edition, you know, there's probably a lot of highlighted, like, or you know, I don't know, yellow stickies, or I don't know, exclamation points or whatever, where you're going far out. What does he say? But if I'm sure you could cut it down, but then you could add a fantastic, at least one chapter about Bant's leadership and that whole period. And then what is happening now. And, you know, personally, what I think is that the Greens, I mean, to talk against myself for a second, when I was writing the book, the primary vote, you know, not that it's all important, but the primary vote sat between 8 and 9% for like years. And I remember First Dog wrote a cartoon, you know, about, you know, the Greens are going to sit on 9% until, you know, and then get fired into the sun or whatever in a million years hence. Like, it was, anyway, it was just like the vote didn't move. The fact that the Greens are sitting on 12%, okay, they lost some seats, they did. I'd happy to talk about that. I never thought that Brisbane was the heartland of the Greens, and it's not. That doesn't reflect the history of the Greens. So for them to suddenly have 3 seats in the reps, that felt like an aberration. But I didn't. Yeah, I certainly did not expect Adam Bant to lose Melbourne, and yeah, so it was a setback, that last federal election. But the primary vote is sitting up at 12%, notwithstanding that you have had this enormous thing happen with the Teals, and that has got to have shaved. I haven't done the analysis, but that's got to have shaved votes off the Greens, because a lot of them are effectively Greens voters, and doctors' wives type in the old stereotype, you know, and I think that the party has in the last, for example, in a full-throated defense of a free Palestine, or calling out what, you know, any number of organizations are now calling a genocide in Gaza. You know, they have in the you know, advocating a position on climate action that's in line with climate science, which shouldn't even be controversial. But it's the only party that does
being
it.
the lone critical voice of AUKUS at this point now too.
Yeah. Or the agenda that Max Chandler made, that prosecuted on housing, you know, and tax reform. Those are things that have a broad constituency and a place in the debate, without question, in my view. And I'm, you know, as an ABC journalist, I'm trying to be as least opinionated as I can. But I think that there's no question that there is an argument for scrutiny of AUKUS. There's no question there's an argument for scrutiny of, you know, we're talking about housing every single day. Climate action, you know, Gaza. These are not fringe issues. These are important issues, and the Greens have a contribution to make. And I think they've shown that in the last. So I cannot believe, I might be proved wrong at the next election, but I cannot believe that the party is about to tank, notwithstanding that they lost 3 seats in the reps last time on the basis of a small movement in the primary vote.
All right. Now, Emerald, I saw your little face. I need to give you a chance to respond. What do you think of Paddy's belief?
What, to Brisbane being...
Brisbane not being the natural heartland of the party?
No, I mostly make that face
to take us all.
in jest. Like, I obviously, as a Brisbane Green, we would always argue that you guys thought, they said we couldn't do it, so we couldn't win those seats in Brisbane. And we did. But no, I take your point that it's true that I think people were surprised by that, but they were perhaps even more surprised when the Greens lost Melbourne.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that also speaks to another big theme that kept coming up again and again and again, and this is something that I think absolutely still applies to the party today, particularly in the wake of 2025, and that is the identity crisis question. The Green Greens versus the Red Greens. How radical, how much of a role does class politics play in the Australian Greens, and how has, as a party, we've tried to reconcile all these competing interests from, derogatorily, the Tree Tories, people who came to the party and the movement with a first and foremost emphasis on environmental action. Others come from the trade union movement and from class politics. We saw the tensions between the Tasmanian branch, the New South Wales branch play out again and again over this history. And in terms of individuals, that's landed in Bob Brown and Lee Rhiannon. Whether Bob Brown he's certainly anti-neoliberal. I don't think he ever identified as a socialist or wouldn't wear that label necessarily. Perhaps might suggest that those labels are outdated. Lee Rhiannon, communist or at least democratic socialist, perhaps revolutionary socialist, and that kind of tradition. And I think we see that manifesting today in terms of, Larissa Waters is an environmental lawyer. A lot of respect for the work she does. She's really passionate about climate and gender equality. Adam Bandt did his PhD looking at Marxism in a way. How are all those tensions sort of playing out, do you think, in this history that you're seeing? And I guess, did you see any moment where that got particularly resolved, or whether that's still a question that hangs over the party today?
I felt like between 2022 and 2025, that there was a kind of resolution, and I, the Greens had a 30-year celebration of the formation of the Australian Greens down at the Hobart Town Hall, where Adam Bandt spoke ahead of the 2022 election. And I wasn't sure that he would turn up necessarily, because there's not a lot of love lost between, for example, Adam Bandt and Christine Milne, as I understand, based on their respective, contributions in that balance of power government and under Christine's leadership. Nothing, untoward, but, they were kind of factional opponents, I think would be fair to say. And yet Bandt did turn up as the current Greens leader, but, Bob spoke, Christine spoke, and Bandt did turn up and said, we're going to win. We're going to win in this coming election, and I can't remember if he put a number of seats that they were going to win, but sure enough, they did. And never win Richmond, that seems to be a perennial disappointment. Never win what's it called now? Cooper. Obviously
McNamara,
there's McNamara. There's the lost seat of bloody Wilkie's seat. All these heartbreaking, Freo. But they did win in Brizzy, and I felt between 2022 and 2025, with the primary vote sitting in double figures, and a real influence in the reps that the party had brought, that Bandt had succeeded in bringing together both wings of the party. Not that there are only two, because there's more than two, and there's it's gross simplification. But I did think that there was a resolution to it. But I also think that you will never resolve that conundrum or that difference of opinion between different wings of the party, and you wouldn't want to have a party that lost either. If you just had a Green Party that had environment only, that has never been the Greens story. The way the Greens grew is through Tampa or through marriage equality. That's what drove the Greens vote. The biggest uptick, the doubling, came with the Tampa. So it has never been the case. And you look at the Four Pillars and the German Greens history, and it has never been the case that it's only been a party about the environment. And so I suppose that I get a little bit frustrated when, for example, okay, just to change, Lee Rhiannon's greatest contribution in my mind to the party is the work that she did on the integrity of the democratic system at a federal level and getting rid of developer donations in New South Wales, and then donations reform and electoral reform at a federal level. That doesn't matter if she's a communist or not a communist. It's got nothing to do with it. It's got about integrity of the electoral system and getting donations, which are a pernicious influence, as we see in America every day, pernicious influence on democracy, getting them out of the system. And they haven't succeeded, absolutely. But I personally thought that was a great contribution to Australian democracy, trying to get the donations reform and electoral reform with optional preferential and all that. I don't want to reduce everything to watermelons versus tree Tories. I don't think that you'll ever resolve it. I think it's good to have people that care about. Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
The best way, I think, and this is why I thought Adam Bant's leadership was so significant, was because he was in the reps and he had to come up with. I thought he had a real theory of how to grow the party and achieve change. And his theory was that you needed to concentrate on getting 50% of the vote. It's not like the Senate where you can sneak in on 0.8 of a quota or whatever it is. You need to get 50%. Because you're going to have both major parties preferencing against you. Although I think he first got elected on Liberal preferences. But in the end, when they realised that actually, he's got a primary vote in the, he's going to come second, then they stopped doing that. And he had to then he basically had to target a 50% primary vote. And his way of doing that was to go to people, a bit like the Brisbane politics, get on the ground and find out what the issues of the people are that you're seeking to represent. And he said to me, if you do that, you'll find that they're much more willing to listen to you on climate change. And so, for example, he says the criticism of the Communist Party was that their answer for everything was to smash capitalism. And, whatever issue someone came up to them and said, that they wanted, whatever grievance they had, the answer was smash capitalism. Well, a criticism of the environment movement is the answer to everything is tackle climate change. And his approach and the way he held Melbourne for a decade or whatever it was, more. What was it? What are we talking? 2010 to
15.
Yeah, 15 years. So the way he holds it for 15 years is by understanding the daily issues that constituents are facing, whether it's unaffordable housing or whatever. And if you advocate for them, then they'll be more receptive to your message on climate change. And I thought that is a good formula. That is a formula, for breaking into the lower house, which, as it turns out, hasn't happened, really. We'll see, I suppose, constantly projecting these seats that they're going to win in 20 years hence. But, it hasn't really happened. I don't know if it's a good strategy, but it seemed to me that at least there was a theory there and an approach. And I would, to be honest, I suppose I'm betraying that I would quite like to write about it and how the party breaks into the House of Representatives. If that's, what's happened with the crossbench now is they're getting lost in the crossbench, in the reps. So, so the teal movement changes that dynamic. But anyway.
Well, and now every reporter thinks that crossbench just means independent, but that's my own little rhetorical bugbear that every journalist refers to the crossbench and the Greens. Because, the Greens now, for some reason, don't seem to be the crossbench, I guess, with the advent of the teals. But anyway.
Yeah, I guess... I look, I'm a democratic socialist. My political critique leads me back to capitalism and the economic system being at the heart of all the issues that sort of face us. And that's been my journey, the journey of lots of, I think, millennials over the past decade in the kind of Corbyn, Bernie wave and the kind of the politics that got me excited about Adam and about the Queensland Greens is that kind of stuff. I'm not suggesting or naive enough to think that everyone in the Australian Greens should be a socialist or will identify as a socialist. But it's a very different thing between that and sort of what we saw in Richard Di Natale's response to Left Renewal, which is saying, if you're a socialist, you're crazy. The Greens aren't the party for you, and get out, basically. So surely, I think it's important that the Greens are able to be a place where people can be socialists and have at least anti-capitalist politics pretty explicitly. I don't think that saying you're a socialist is like political death in Australia, as much as some people might like to say, but you need to actually explain what that means. And you need to, as you say, foreground the issues. And when someone asks you straight up, are you a socialist? And you are, and you say yes, and here's what that means, that can be a political winning strategy, or at least it doesn't have to be the political death sentence that certainly some would like it to be,
I think but this is where I come back to the conversation around when the Greens get stuck in the muck of internal conflict, disagreement, versus when they're able to kind of unite, and they're able to unite when they're winning. And this, I believe, has been one of the projects that the Brisbane Greens really took up, was not just that we need to make the party a socialist party. That might be the kind of underpinning, but the method was, we are not going to win that by going to national conference and arguing that socialism is better than environmentalism. We achieve that by winning. And the philosophy of winning is so, I still like it. That's so central to, it sounds kind of obvious for a political party, but genuinely it's very central to the Brisbane Greens project, because it's bloody hard, and also people don't want to do it as much to argue with you about whether this is the right approach for the party, when you can just be like, well, we won, we're winning, and they're like, okay, great, yeah, let's keep winning. So I sort of am less concerned with whether we have, with these conversations around, is it a socialist party, is it a protest party, are we communists, are we revolutionary socialists, are we democratic socialists, blah blah. Then what I think you are still somewhat getting at, Tom, which is, what does that mean when it comes to how we speak to the electorate and how we win? Because that is that's the most constructive thing that we can focus our energies into.
Yeah. Well, I thought the progression from Jono winning in Gabba to then breaking finally into that unicameral parliament with Maiwar, then breaking into the reps. That was a great story. I wrote 3,000 words on it for the Saturday paper and I thought that, I was concentrating on Jono because I thought that his politics was in some way joyous, completely different, but also joyous. He's in a band, it's like I was thinking of his lyric. What is it? I'll hire your son, you hire mine. What a stitch up. This great Rivermouth, whatever it was called. And
Rivermouth, yeah.
Yeah, and the idea of, participatory budgeting from the council, where you just go, I'm not going to tell you as your elected representative what I want to spend money on. I'm going to find out what you want to spend money on. And wherever it's only $3,000, but we're going to throw it over to you. And it was a little bit anarchic and a little bit, and certainly very different. And what I did like about it was that he said, the thing that really stuck with me with John O'Shea was him saying, we don't wake up in the morning worried what the Courier Mail's going to say. We don't, we expect, come at me, we expect them to have a crack But the public doesn't care what the Courier Mail says if you're advocating on behalf of them. And, on issues like housing, which, I gather I'm not from Brisbane, but I gather in inner Brisbane is just like everywhere else, just ridiculously
rising faster
structurally
than a lot of most other places. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, or even responding to bloody floods. That's a form of politics that did have a great impact. So now, does Max Chandler made that overreach by getting up alongside the CFMEU and protesting again on their behalf? I think that probably did the Greens a lot of damage. I think it did, and everything that's happened subsequently is kind of the more corruption, revelations that come out of the CFMEU, the worse it looks, in my opinion. But that's just me. That's just my opinion. I don't know whether that debate is still kicking around inside the party or not. But I did see that he and Jono were both writing about how the party needs to, I suppose they're concerned that the party is drifting now, or moving back to the centre, or it's becoming too cooperative with Labor. I think I saw Max write that the Greens need to get out of this mindset that the way to achieve change is to negotiate with Labor in Parliament. And I think that is, one of the things that I think David Shoebridge has been incredibly good at is using Parliament. All of the levers that are not just your vote on a bill, but it's your putting in questions and your ability to call witnesses and grill them, and your ability to work with the media to get stories up. That is all ways of using your position in Parliament that don't involve butting heads with the Labor Party. And, you see Abigail Boyd in the New South Wales Parliament doing that on childcare, working with the ABC on a huge investigation of, poor standards in childcare, especially private operators.
Well, I'm curious. I do want to ask, to kind of elucidate your point there about how someone like Shoebridge is using Parliament, because my understanding, my argument around Parliament agrees with the take that the Greens cannot present to the electorate that our theory of change, what we're offering to you is that you get Greens in Parliament and they support Labor, they work with the government to slightly improve what the government's doing. I think that does not respond to the sentiment of the electorate at the moment, the very anti-political sentiment that we're seeing. So my argument is you can still use Parliament. It's still worthwhile getting MPs elected to Parliament, because otherwise what the fuck are we doing? Then disband the party if it's not worthwhile. But to not get sucked into the government's agenda in Parliament, you can still use levers however possible to affect change in the community or to bring the community into Parliament. But I think there is a difference between doing that and getting just towing the line of whatever the government wants to deal with in Parliament that day and getting stuck into that kind of agenda.
Yeah. Yeah. And, especially where you have a government where there's not a lot of Parliament going on, there isn't. So,
but don't we inevitably run up to exactly the same big debates and clashes that we've seen constantly? So a housing bill comes up, and at the end of the day, you've either got to vote for it or vote against it, or the CPRS happens, or inevitably that is where things lead. Now, I'm not saying that you're just going to have to adopt a position on that, and you're going to stand by your ground. So you can't really be in Parliament and then also vacate the ground on those debates around those big bills, right? And unfortunately, it seems that's the way that people remember it, and the way that the Labor Party uses a media narrative to say, look at the Greens, they're blockers, and nothing's ever good enough for these hippies,
Well, I think that the CPRS vote was an albatross, and no matter how many times I tried to explain the context and how, Wong and Albanese were, and Rudd were, sidelining the Greens deliberately and negotiating with the Liberal Party and didn't give them an option. And, at the end of the day, I think the broader public and the media don't have any patience or interest in any of that.
Wait, that didn't work, Paddy? This didn't work? This
No.
doesn't work to explain to people the truth?
This book was meant to put
What,
the
are you
CPRS
crazy?
thing to bed once and for all. Come on.
People don't read all this to know the truth. That's nuts.
Yeah.
It's just a lost cause arguing why would the Greens vote against climate change. Yeah, so that's just got to be, one former Bob Brown staffer told me that on that day, when it must have been the second vote, Bob realised that it was going to be a grave error and was almost literally running down to try and stop the vote. I never got to the bottom of that. But I think that the Greens, and I think that people also forget that the Greens did work with Labor in the very next term of Parliament to introduce a world-beating carbon price, and that. And I don't buy the argument, which for example, Greg Combay would make, which is that if the Greens had voted up the CPRS in the first place, Tony Abbott wouldn't have abolished it because it would have been well bedded down. Well, I don't buy that. I think Tony Abbott would have abolished it, and whether it was 1 year old or 5 years old. So personally, anyway, that's. That's just my opinion, and it's a kind of.
He got rid of the Climate Change Authority and tried to nix the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. Oh, but I'll leave this bedded in carbon trading scheme. It's just been bedded in so much. I'm a reasonable man. I'm Tony Abbott. What the fuck are you talking about?
I don't think so.
I do just think if there's something that
I'm sorry to interrupt. I think Paddy's got a heart out.
I do.
At 12:30. Yeah.
I do.
Sorry, we've got. If you have to do one last one, sorry, but I just want to
somewhat summarizing, if there's one thing that I've kind of taken away from the book overall is looking at the history of the Greens and the ups and downs, and there are all these little fights scattered here and there, but when the Greens are at their best and when they are able to eventually win and achieve change is when they stick to their values and their principles. And that's why, I've seen that in the last election. I think they didn't do that effectively. And I just always come back to that I think that ultimately in these fights, they may get attacked for it, reamed for it. It may end up another albatross around their necks, sure. But in the long term, it will do more harm than good to diverge from those principles, even if you think that it's going to be more effective strategically. I think the Greens need to stick to what they stand for, what they believe in. Someone needs to do it in politics, Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that there's no doubt they might not have the outsized power of the Nats, but they have an outsized influence on the debate, I think, for whatever that's worth, because I don't think any other it's that think tank thing. I don't think the other parties are doing the policy work.
Paddy has to go. Thank you so much for your time. If people have been listening to the series and you've enjoyed getting inside the Greens, it's still absolutely worth getting inside the Greens because the second part of the book is sort of looking at the 4 pillars and sort of a summary of like where the Greens are at on those 4 pillars around peace and nonviolence, grassroots democracy, sustainability, and the other one, and how the Greens are doing in those respects. So thank you for writing this book. Thank you for talking to us, Paddy Manning. We really appreciate it, man. And all the best for looking at Rupert Murdoch for the rest of your life.
Thank you for podcasting it.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks, buddy.
Cheers.